it's clearly defined, but we try to always say, okay, it doesn't really matter whether a good idea is a good idea. Whether it doesn't really matter who gets the idea, and also to stimulate really people to sort of not think in these very hierarchical structures. Of course, in the end, we have people who are more responsible than others, but it would be a shame if people don't dare to speak up because it's just yeah, somebody in a higher position. So we are aware of the differences, and sometimes we have to push really hard to go against this cultural trend, because we also have indeed trainees from all over the world, even though it's sometimes against the culture, because we also promote democratic values. We try to make change then and really give the opportunity to people to speak up. So, and in some countries it's more challenging. Georgia, for example, is really challenging in that respect. Yeah, I think what we see on the management level also comes back in the teaching practices, because we think it's very important that education helps to stimulate independent thinkers who are able to form their own opinions, to really be critical, look at the different evidence. So it also comes back in the sort of different methodologies that you use. A very traditional approach is that you just have the teacher with the authority, and whatever they say is the truth. So we always try to debunk that and say, well, in reality it's much more complex. And the true learning is really happening when students discuss amongst themselves. So you have to be much less authoritative in that sense and give much more power to the students. And it comes back in the whole the didactics, the methodology. I think in the Netherlands we work in a situation where power distance is very low. There's not a big difference between the people higher in the hierarchy. So in that sense it's easier, because we always want to empower the people who are the teachers, so lower status in this sort of traditional approach. And that can be quite good. So we prepare ourselves by having different working methods. So also if you're, for example, somebody really an academic professor, you have to translate it into something practical, that there's always room for questioning afterwards. It can be quite yeah, sometimes daring if you have somebody who's in a high position and is really blocking the process because they promote perhaps ideas that we find very old-fashioned or not in line with the project that we're trying to implement. So then sometimes you have to seek the confrontation. Being aware of all these differences is just the first step of working more effectively. If you have a conference here, for example, everybody starts exactly at the time as is indicated in the program. Whereas we had a conference in Bologna, for example, in Italy, and then it was always running a little bit late. It's more like the academic quarter we have here at the university. So it can also be not only a cultural divide literally between the different nations, but also like what kind of background do you have. So in this case you had an academic culture, and compared to a more like business-like culture where you say, okay, 12 is really 12, and then you start. Because you know your research is about status. While we always work for training, for the professional development of teachers, we also work to develop educational material, and always in bigger teams. And you can see that in some countries there's much more equality between, for example, the teachers and the academics. My colleague Jonathan just came back from Bologna, and there was a seminar where it was really the teachers who were in the audience, and they had hardly any opportunity to react to the lectures that were given by the academics, so the professors. So the status is really, okay, you have the authority, the expert, and then the teacher. Well, we don't really agree with this philosophy, so we try to have much more interaction between people from, well, the different communities, teaching so whether you have higher education or secondary education. And also we try to involve always, as much as possible, the minorities, because it's usually the ones who are in power are the majority. So we try to get a bit of a better balance, and that's both in terms of content, when we talk about history education, but also in terms of really people, to give opportunity to those people who are normally left out, so that they can make their careers as textbook authors, curriculum developers, etc. To talk about the power difference, in some countries, for example, the like former communist countries, you have very big differences in status. So there you have like the editing team, for example, they are really taking over all the work and finishing things off and telling you, the authors, okay, we just made some changes. Whereas in the UK, for example, there's much more dialogue. Wouldn't you consider doing things differently? So also the language that is used is very different. But I think it matters less and less because you can just refer to the experience you had. So you can say, I was there in Bosnia, I saw the people working together, I noticed this or that. So if you have the right arguments, you say the right things, I think age is not so much of a problem. Although again, of course, there are cultural differences. Yes. In some countries you will be just ignored because you're not old enough.